Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you may be listening to us from, here on this big, beautiful planet of ours. This is Michael Cross here with another edition of Unlock the Door Radio here on UCY TV Production, where we believe in digging way deeper than you're going to find in the mainstream media. Now, before I begin, I'd just like to encourage people, if you're actually listening to this later on YouTube, and click on the link that's in the right-hand corner and check out my website and also become a subscriber so you can keep up on latest shows in case you missed them on this broadcast. So anyway, what topic should we deal with tonight? Well, you know what? It's a pretty important topic. I was in a debate with a good friend of mine, and it was on the election of all things. He supports Hillary, and what I was doing was he brought up some issues that he felt were important, and then I said, well, how do you feel about the possibility of World War III? Do you think that Trump or Hillary would be the safest candidate in regards to starting World War III? And he said, well, Putin and Trump seem to be, what do you call that? They seem to be BFFs, best friends forever. So, Putin's probably trying to help Trump get elected so Putin can do his will and all these other things. So essentially, and then he tried to evade the issue, but essentially he was saying that Trump would get along with the Russians. I don't think Trump would be someone who would be a pushover, but he's not someone that wants to confront Russia in the neoconservative sense, in the way that Hillary appears to want to confront Russia, especially in regards to Syria, in which she seems to take a much more hardline approach towards the intervention there. And I don't mean the sense that, okay, Trump, he said he wanted to go bomb ISIS and stuff like that. But, there's some of the people that are high up, that are people that, surround Hillary, that seem to support this whole concept of a no-fly zone. And I'm just wondering what would happen if, first of all, the legitimate government of Syria, hate Assad or love Assad or whatever, the legitimate government is actually the Assad regime. And they've only invited, actually, Russia to come in regards to assisting them in the air. So the U.S. coming in and establishing a no-fly zone over a country, when they've already invited another superpower to come in, just puts us so close to some sort of confrontation. And if you think about what happened just last week in regards to the U.S. bombing the Syrian army and allowing ISIS to take a huge strategic point in which now they can advance. And you wonder, was it a mistake? Does American foreign policy really want to get rid of ISIS? Or is it more like, let's just keep the pot stirring there until it's such time that Assad is weakened and cannot maintain power anymore because his military and support has been decimated, and then the U.S. can kind of move in and install whatever they want. It's hard to say what the ultimate policy would be, but let's just say this. It really freaking gets close to a nuclear war. And I think right now we are closer to a nuclear war than at any other time in history. Okay? Any other time. The Cuban Missile Crisis, nothing compared to this. All the posturing during the Cold War, nothing compared to this. You've got a situation where Russia feels that it's being backed into the corner, where it's being chipped away at, with the ultimate goal of weakening or even destroying Russia, which is part of the neoconservative agenda. And when I say neoconservative, do not get confused with the idea that that means conservatives. Now, you may hear from the mainstream media that that is mainstream conservatism. It's not. It's not what passed as conservatism up until actually recent years, like the 1990s and so forth. Neoconservatism is something that is, where the U.S. looks upon the world and does not ever want to have competition again the way it did when the Soviet Union was in existence. And that means that if a country does start gaining power, then you need to make sure that it doesn't. Now, whether that's Russia or China or any other country in the future, if they're not part of an alliance, then they're competition, and you need to treat them as such. And that's very dangerous when you're dealing with nuclear weapons. Now, the one thing, there's an article. I'd like people to check up on it if you can, and just type in, because I actually prefer people looking up information, okay, without me just giving information. I like it when people look it up for themselves. I always say that when I make a comment. I say, hey, look it up if you don't believe me. But there's an article that's in The Intercept, and it's dated August 9th, 2016. Just search for this one. Ex-CIA director who endorsed Clinton calls for killing Iranians and Russians in Syria. He essentially is saying he wants the Russians and the Iranians to start feeling the price of going in and assisting Assad. And, how would we be reacting if a prominent Russian were to say that they need to start, sending Americans home in body bags? That would be front page headlines in the mainstream media of the United States. This doesn't get anything. I've seen this particular story reported in the alternative media or the independent media, but nowhere else. Okay? This is the kind of stuff that you would think, whoa, this should be like front page. And it's not. Front page is like what? Americans aren't concerned with the possibility of nuclear war? Let me just say this. Nuclear war is not a video game. Okay? It's not The Walking Dead even with a little radiation involved. Okay? Much worse. I'd much, much, much rather live in the world of The Walking Dead than in a world after just a limited nuclear war, if anyone believes such a thing is possible. Because you know what? A limited nuclear war makes anything in The Walking Dead look like, a trip to Disneyland. And people have got to realize what nuclear war really would mean. If we wind up pushing too much, what happens if something you got a major incident take place, escalations build, and then war starts? Are Americans willing to sacrifice their major cities in order to make a point with Russia? Is Russia willing to sacrifice its major cities in order to make a point with the United States? Well, you could think that cool heads would prevail, but I'm not sure that they would. I'm really not sure of that. But let's just look at what nuclear war would be. Let's pretend we even had a limited nuclear war, okay? Where maybe a little exchange takes place in Eastern Europe. The idea that maybe for some strange reason, I have no clue as to why they would do it, Russia would try to take the Baltic states. Latvia. I've been to Latvia. It's a beautiful country, but I really don't see any reason why Russia would want to risk a nuclear war taking it. Okay? The majority of people are not Russian there. Strategically, it's not that important, really, for Russia, unless you actually had a full-scale war taking place between NATO and Russia. Then it actually wouldn't be that hard for the Russians to go through Kaliningrad and slice off that whole section of, the Baltic states and some chunks of Poland and so forth. The thing is that, let's say it winds up, a limited exchange where just a few nuclear bombs go off. Okay? Of just a few. So let's take a look at exactly what that would mean. I think people should actually look up what a limited nuclear war would be and see what the effects would be. Now, there was a lot of talk back in the 90s and so forth about, what would happen if India and Pakistan went at it, because they don't really have that many nuclear weapons, but it would really cause a lot of damage. Now, let's just point something out here, okay? That's India and Pakistan. Just a few nukes go off. Now, let's say you hit a major city, okay? Just a regular Hiroshima-sized nuclear bomb. I read somewhere that New York City has 15 nuclear bombs pointed at it by Russia. Now, Los Angeles, I don't know. Probably Los Angeles has nukes targeted from Russia and China, But let's just say you hit a city. Let's say Los Angeles, because you have that scene that maybe many people remember from Terminator 2. Yeah, Terminator 2, where the woman's looking over, she's having like a vision, and she's looking over the city while she's with her children on the child on the playground, and she gets vaporized when the flash hits. Let's just think about this for a moment for all you video game people out there who like to play apocalyptic video games in which, there's a nuclear war and you're fighting mutants and that sort of thing. Bomb goes off. You got maybe a radius of about a mile. That's about 1.5 kilometers for those listening in Europe. You've got a radius of about a mile, and that would go out, and pretty much everything there would be vaporized. Have you ever seen those pictures when the bomb, I can't remember if it was Hiroshima or Nagasaki, where the bomb went off above ground? And so there was a major heat blast. Okay? You're playing around with the power of the sun, okay? You're playing around with fission. And there's shadows on walls where people were walking down the street, and the blast hit, it vaporized them, but their bodies were casting a shadow against walls in which there's an imprint. Now they disappeared, okay? Boom, gone. Okay, most of the people, in the middle of that blast zone would be dead. Okay, gone. That's it. Then you go out another, couple miles or so, and those people, for the most part, most of them die. Okay, most of them die. Some would survive, maybe if they were in buildings that had a little bit of thick walls and so forth. But if they didn't, they'd have severe damage. They would not survive very long, unless, of course, they were in some sort of maybe government shelter or something like that provided for the elite. But what would happen is they would pretty much be all dead. The ones that would survive would be, their eardrums would be perforated from the sound. Their skin would be pretty much gone. Okay, so they'd be peeled. They would be skinless, and they would very soon die of the shock of, basically, think about it. They're basically just what's left after you take the skin, fry the eyes out, and so forth. Speaking of eyes, if you look at a nuclear blast from a distance, then, if you're in the city and like you're the Sarah Connor looking over as the bomb goes off over Los Angeles, she would cease to be able to see. Okay? Now that's a very interesting concept. Several miles out, if you actually saw the blast take place, your cornea would be melted. You would, and if you're a little bit further away, you would have a permanent damage to your eyes. from looking at it. I mean, you think about people say, don't look at the eclipse of the sun because it can damage your eyes. This is much more powerful and brighter than the sun. Okay? And so pretending as if the thermal wave, it's like a pyroclastic cloud. You ever see those? When a volcano goes off, it sends out a cloud at like 600 miles per hour, and if it hits you, you just melt. Essentially, yeah, you're burnt alive by these temperatures. The one that would come out from a nuclear bomb is much greater than that. And then you go out a little further, and then you're going to have just massive damage. Think about hurricanes, but these hurricanes are actually nukes. The radiation and so forth. Now, the radiation will kill most of the people that, if you're talking about a city like Los Angeles, the middle section's gone. The ring around it for a couple miles is gone. Now you're starting to hit people surviving, let's say a couple miles, but many of them that are very much exposed to the brightness will, have massive burns. They're going to die eventually. When Hiroshima was hit, there were people in the river who'd gone to the river to try to cool off, and they basically were just fried. They were just, the river was strewn with bodies because the people would just die. And then you go a little bit further, then you have most of the people surviving, but at the same time, what happens to your infrastructure? Now, I've just talked about one city. Let's just pretend it's just a few cities on both sides. Let's just pretend. New York, London, Berlin, maybe. Moscow, St. Petersburg, maybe. And, of course, I'm not even talking about the military exchange that would be taking place, where pretty much your standing militaries would be targeted with tactical nukes and battlefield nukes, and basically they'd be gone too. So what do we have there? Aside from just the human toll, understanding that anyone you knew in the city is dead. In the outer areas, people understanding that they're dead. You're also going to have the radiation destroying electricity. Okay? Everything you've got that's electronic, bye-bye. It's gone. And so this like EMP, there's the theory that, first of all, that the Russians have EMP devices that they would set off that would fry all the electrical grid. But there's also the theory that when you have these large-scale blasts take place, that the radiation would then destroy electronic equipment. So, you got a pacemaker, you're gone. Okay, bye-bye. If you've got all your stuff on computer's worthless. Might as well just, use it as a doorstop or something. So all of our infrastructure that depends upon electricity, it's gone. So when the lights go out, and that's going to be a major problem, because now how do you raise food? Okay, even I'll get to the food production in just a minute, but let's just pretend it's a limited war, and we still have most of our agriculture still in existence. Then you're going to wind up with a situation in which you're going to have people with no food and no hope, and that's when you're going to see. It's going to turn into like warlord situation. And the thing that's different from The Walking Dead is the fact that these are going to all be cognizant people. Now, many people will just be in shock and they'll just give up and die. Okay? They'll just say, forget it. I don't even want to live here. There'll be others who will be very, very prepared, and if they're not prepared, they're going to find a way to survive. So it's going to be pretty brutal. And, when you don't have a paycheck for the cops, they're going to be trying to save their families. Okay? Military, same way. You're going to have total disintegration of the government infrastructure. If you've got a neighbor that really doesn't like you and they're armed, no one's going to protect you anymore. Okay? You're gone if they choose to take the law into their hands, because there won't be any law. Now, I will say one thing. I read that there was a briefing that was given to Ronald Reagan back in the 80s in which the military experts show him what would happen in the event of a nuclear war. Now, this is a real credit to Ronald Reagan. Reagan became physically ill. That's right. He became physically ill. The trauma of thinking about what a nuclear war would be like just sickened him. And you notice, it was Reagan who tried to actually bring peace between Gorbachev's regime and the United States. Okay? Kennedy, after, the Cuban Missile Crisis, he really wanted to have a peaceful cooperation with the Soviet Union. And I'm not one of those people that, is in the whole conspiracy thing with Kennedy. But, it's interesting. But the thing is, he coincidentally, when he was setting up these programs that he wanted to go to really open things up with the Soviet Union, he kind of passed away real fast. But anyway, the leadership that we had, I think that would include, you had Reagan, you had Carter before, you had Nixon and Ford, Johnson even, Kennedy, Eisenhower. They all were statesmen. They all understood. Now, some people are probably going, wow, Carter? Carter was sane, okay? You might not agree with him on everything, but he was sane. So was Johnson. So was, Nixon. But I'm not really quite sure about the state of our leadership that we're getting from the Republican and Democrat establishments today. Because this idea that the government is floating, that I've been reading more and more about, that, this plan of, hey, America could take a limited nuclear war and come out ahead. How will you win a nuclear war? Let me ask you that. Remember what I said? St. Petersburg, Moscow, they're gone. Okay, well, New York, London, Berlin, they're gone. What do? Say, okay, we won, haha, we declare victory. Okay, or do you invade the other country and threaten it? Well, you've already let the genie out of the bottle. Okay, you've already used nukes. Well, then the other side, whichever side starts losing territory is going to shoot off a nuclear weapon and destroy the army of the other side. Well, of course, that means the other side is going to be thinking, well, you just wiped out our whole military here. You wiped out, 20 divisions, of NATO. Well, let's get rid of a few of your divisions in Russia. And then, there's no stop to it, okay? Once it starts, it's going to be like a bar room fight with drug cartel people when the lights go out, and people are just firing away at each other. Okay, that's what it's going to be, and then you're going to see massive destruction. If that happens, what would happen then is you would get massive amounts of dust in the air. Very few people realize that there was a volcanic eruption that was just before the French Revolution that cut crop production in Europe. It was a volcano going off, okay? And, somewhere in the Pacific. And it caused the winter to be abnormally long in Europe. And crops died, and a lot of people were starving in France, which, of course, when people were starving, they're more likely to follow people that call for revolution. And, I always get a kick out of history books that don't ever talk about science, because history people tend to, you say something about science and they're like, yeah, they stick a cross up and you're like, oh, be gone with thee, type thing. Although I shouldn't say that, because the irony is usually the science type people are more religious than the social science people. But anyway, the thing is, you don't see these kinds of things talked about that often. But, there was a scientific reason behind it. And the thing is, now think about all these nuclear bombs going off and sending radioactive dust into the air. First of all, you're going to block most of the sunlight in the northern hemisphere. You see, the northern and southern hemispheres, if the war was only in the northern hemisphere, it would affect the southern hemisphere, but it would not devastate South America, Australia, New Zealand, and those parts of Asia that are in the southern hemisphere, Africa. Now, infrastructures would be destroyed, and there would be mass die-offs, but the infrastructures of the northern hemisphere would be devastated. And the thing is that I've heard it would be like most of the sunlight would be blocked in the north. A lot of the sunlight would be blocked in the south, which means temperatures would cool. You've heard the term nuclear winter. Yeah, you haven't heard that since the 1980s. Yet we're now we're way closer to nuclear war now. The concept of nuclear winter would be that your temperatures would drastically decrease in the northern hemisphere. When those temperatures decrease, growing seasons would end. Okay? Livestock would die. Okay? I mean, what would you do? What would you go to feed them? What are you going to feed your cows, your pigs, your horses, and these kinds of animals? What would you feed them? There's no more grain. Okay? Because you can't grow the grain. You're going to have a little bit of time that you're going to have a lot of barbecues. But after that, you're going to run out of food. And so most of your livestock, most of your most of your large mammals would actually die off. You'd have an extinction that would be something similar to the theory the comet when it hit the Earth destroyed most of the dinosaurs, and then you would have that here. Now the thing is that that in the southern hemisphere, the growing seasons would be cut as well. It would be like having thick dust in the air, like when you go into a very polluted city, and so forth. But there would probably still be some life in those regions, although with population densities what they are, in many of these countries, it would be a brutal existence because people would fight for whatever they could get. Again, Walking Dead, who do you worry about more, the zombies or the people? It's the people, okay? They're way more dangerous. That's the way it would be like during after a nuclear war. Now, on top of this, you're going to see, my prediction, I've read a lot of stuff that has various predictions. Some people say all human life would die off. Others say no, well, the people that took precautions, preppers, government personnel that are underground in their fallout shelters, like that scene talking about in Dr. Strangelove. This would be a die-off that would probably be more than 90% of the human population. Just getting rid of the electrical grid alone in the United States, I've heard that would kill about 2/3 of the population. That's no nuclear war even. Just the electrical grid going down in the United States. Within a year, you would see approximately 70% of the population die off. Add into that the radiation sickness, cancer, and all of these other factors, and yes, humans would survive. But it'd be similar to that. Now, maybe many of you are not old enough to remember this, but remember there was a Star Trek episode, the original Star Trek, the good one. I don't care that much for the newer ones, but except for the movies. The movies lately have been kind of good. But anyway, in the original Star Trek, you have one in which they come to this planet, and it's actually, there's been a war between the communists and the people that supported democracy, but it took place thousands of years earlier. And they note that there's this one guy who's he's come down and he's made alliance with the communists, and because he thinks they have a secret of like these 1,000 or 2,000 year lifespans. And what it turns out, though, is he's wrong. They don't have any kind of secret mixture. It's just that it's noted that after this major nuclear war, only the very, 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 very fittest people survived. And so maybe after a nuclear war, you would wind up with a just the very strongest people or the cleverest surviving it. I would probably put more faith in the southern hemisphere surviving, though, than the northern hemisphere. Although there would be people that would survive. I think preppers and so forth would survive. But nevertheless, Western civilization as you know it, and the rest of whatever's in the northern hemispheres would perish. Okay? The Gulf states, they would perish. I mean, they import their food. They're out in the desert. Those people would die. Most people would die of starvation. And I would say it would take hundreds of years to restore anything close to what human civilization was like before a nuclear war. And if you did do it, many of the cities you think of today wouldn't exist. They'd just be abandoned, and nature would take its course with them, and they would just disappear. You might see cities like New York, just look like that scene from Planet of the Apes, where Charlton Heston and the girl he's got are on the horse, and he doesn't know yet that he's on Earth in the future. He thinks he's on another planet, and they come to that scene where the Statue of Liberty is just sticking, the top part and the torch is up in the air, but it's buried by coastal sand. And he's just going, you idiots, I saw a meme that said, you idiots, you voted for Hillary. But no, he's really upset because he realizes that Earth is gone, and that he knew. And many, many, many of the cities would just not even be reclaimed. So this is your future. Now, you want to talk about other issues. You want to talk about, some of these issues about Hillary's health or Donald Trump's, saying bad things and mean things and that sort of thing, or mocking people, or Hillary opening a pickle jar or something. By the way, why didn't that pickle jar go pop like that? Every time I open a pickle jar, it makes a popping sound. Maybe I missed it. Okay, maybe I just didn't hear it right. My hearing's not as good as my eyesight. But anyway, the thing is, I think this is an issue that we really should consider. This is a time where we do have a problem with ISIS. We do have to have a coordination. The United States maybe has to figure out, half 500,000 Syrians have died in this conflict. How long do we go? I was talking to a Syrian the other day, a refugee, and he noted that Hillary wants to bring in 65,000 refugees to the United States. And he noted something I had not considered. If that's part of our policy, they plan on this going on indefinitely. That was his conclusion. Okay, 65,000 a year. That means they don't plan on this Syrian situation to end in a year, or 2, or 3, or 4, or 5. He was very perceptive about that. And the thing is, maybe it's just best to just kind of let's solve this. Let's bring people together. Let's get rid of ISIS. I mean, we can't. ISIS are bad guys. Okay, they're not good guys. And they have to be eliminated, but it's better that all of the countries work together on a common strategy, not one country. Well, Russia's just as much. They attack militaries that are attacking ISIS because those militaries, those organizations are against. They're against Assad as well. But then you got the weird situation where the United States, I read an article a while back where you had two rebel forces, by rebels I mean fighting Assad too, two rebel forces fighting against each other, one funded by taxpayer money, I will note, by the Pentagon, and the other one funded by taxpayer money, I will note, by the CIA. And, that is so typical of this whole freaking situation. Okay? Where we have militaries that, essentially it looked like what America did was go in there. And this is where I'll fault Trump on this. I don't think Hillary invented ISIS. I think U.S. policy under Obama and Hillary facilitated ISIS. So, ISIS came about on its own, but then our government nursed it to make it to grow it up. And, at first the idea was, okay, well, it's going to be turmoil. There's going to be all this fighting. They'll take out Assad. They'll take out the Syrian army. And then things can go in America's favor. They'll start, funding the groups that they really trust. At this point, it's like, hey, here's a gun, there's a gun, everywhere's a gun, everyone gets a gun. That was what the United States did. So I think Trump should have said that the U.S. government facilitated the advancement of ISIS. And now what you got? You got this Frankenstein situation when it comes to those guys. And so we need to work together on that one. And we start seeing things shot down. Then, if the Russians wind up getting their military planes shot down, they're going to be really ticked. We also are starting to see Turkey starting to gravitate away from the United States, and looks like they're getting friendly with Russia again. I mean, do we really think that we're winning something in the Middle East right now? I don't think so. And when it comes to the whole situation with Ukraine and Crimea, I mean, there's going to be some points. The U.S. policy towards Tibet in China is generally just, okay, well, Tibet's part of China. Okay? I mean, Tibet will always be part of China. And I think Crimea is going to always be part of Russia. Russia's not going to give it up. Okay? And, you could make the argument that Tibet belonged to China in the past. And, the Chinese feel that it's part of their culture and heritage and their country, ultimately. And I know people will complain about that, but the thing is, no one really expects that things are going to change there. I don't think we're going to go to a war over that policy. And when it comes to Crimea, I think it's the same way. I mean, basically, it's a situation in which Russia's got it, and they're not going to give it up. And I don't know how many Americans are willing to risk a nuclear war over a country they have no clue where it's at. They don't know anything about its history. They know nothing about the people that live there, the culture. Most of them don't know anything about what is going on in this region. It's not because Americans are stupid. Oh my gosh, when you live in another country, you just get this, Americans are stupid and fat and, just atrocious creatures. And I have to point out that, okay, there are many that are, but not the majority. And the thing is that the media is what's responsible for this. The media tries to keep people glued onto superficial things. I mean, I've heard this from so many people that have maybe lived a year outside the United States, and so they have to rely on the internet. So they start watching stuff like BBC. And then they come back to America and they feel like their intelligence is so assaulted when they turn on news, so-called news in the United States, because basically a tabloid in England has better analysis and news coverage than many of our so-called reputable large publications in the United States. I mean, better analysis, and when it comes to the broadcast news, I mean, here's our little soundbite, and and it just turns into a game of who has, which candidate has the cutest soundbite, or how can we, demonize the other side. By the way, when it comes to the Russian demonization thing, I remember, back in the 80s, that there was a lot of networks that would show that they wanted, they wanted to really de-escalate the idea of war. And so they would show these specials, and it would show, kids and families in Moscow and, other places in Russia. And it was kind of an attempt to say, hey, they're people. We can't we just be friends? There was a lot, oh my gosh, there's so many music videos that had that same, let's just be friends and not enemies and that sort of thing. There was a real push. And now you don't see that. In fact, it seems like we've seen a reversal. We've got the Democrats are the war party, and unapologetic about it, whereas the Republicans are split. You got your war hawks. I think you know who those are in the U.S. Senate. And then you've got the ones who are kind of the non-establishment, and they tend to be very much anti-war. And I think what you're going to start, I think what you're going to see after this election is a total, whoever gets elected, you're going to see a change in the way people think about politics. I was made a member of a Bernie Sanders site. Someone thought it was fun on Facebook, so they put me, one of my friends stuck me on, those ones where they could add you. And I decided, just stay on there. And I'm a member of some conservative sites as well. And what's really funny is that I noticed I see the same post. I don't mean the same poster. I mean the same memes, the same news stories, and so forth. About an 80% overlap between the conservative ones and the Bernie Sanders ones. Now there is one difference. I do have one conservative site where most of the people there are like Cruz supporters, and I don't know what they're thinking. They're like, still wanting Cruz to come back from, wherever he's at and save the day. But ultimately, it's kind of weird that the progressives and what I would consider what Hillary calls the alternative right, which she tries to demonize unfairly, they seem to agree with each other. They seem to have way more in agreement than they do in disagreement. And so you may see a total realignment after this election, where you have those establishment types like, the Bushes and so forth. They may gravitate into something that's going to be more of the establishment Democrat and Republican parties, whereas you may see an actual left party and you might see an actual right party, or you could actually see something where those two come together. There's been a lot of theories put forth that if these people could actually find their common ground, they would be the biggest force in the United States. Because, they disagree on a lot of things when it comes to what to do about something, but they agree on what's right and wrong. And, whether it's police brutality, whether it is individual liberty, whether it is war. The Bernie people and the alternative right, the Trump people, whatever, they tend to overlap. They tend to agree with each other. And that is something to really consider, because the media is trying to break those people apart. The U.S. media is propaganda. It tries to turn the blacks against whites. It tries to turn rich against poor, against middle class, against working class, old against young, male against female. I mean, look at the war the way it is. There's a scripture in the Bible. Okay, you may be atheist and you're listening to this, but, bear with me, okay? Yeah, I'm going to quote the Bible here. And there is a scripture in the Bible that does say that in the latter days, you'll have old against young, and a few others, and men against women. And, you read that and you're going, why would that be? Why would men and women be at war with each other? That sounds really strange. And now you're seeing it. You're seeing it nowadays. And who benefits from this? Who benefits from a fragmented society? The people that have the power. Okay? It's just like the Romans used to move various ethnic groups and religious groups around into a region. Ottoman Empire did the same thing. And it was to make sure that you were the force that kept everything together when everyone was fighting. And this is what's being done in the United States, and the Western world for that matter. Keep everyone bickering, keep everyone fighting, and then you do whatever you wish. Okay? Because on Election Day, I've seen this. Election Day, everyone starts going to their party. Just like in World War I, when all these people were talking about solidarity with the working class between Germany and England and France and all these other countries. And then when the war started, those same people were grabbing their banners, and Germany forever, England forever, France forever, and fighting each other with full fervor. Just like Democrats and Republicans, they start fighting each other. Although I will have to say this, aside from the Bernie people who tend to be ideologically honest, on the Republican side, Republicans will actually viciously attack each other. A lot of Republicans just have shown no mercy to the likes of Lindsey Graham and John McCain and George Bush and Paul Ryan, for that matter. And so, Republicans do have a tendency to if they see someone they don't like, they don't care about the party, and they will attack them. Establishment Democrats, no, they'll defend their person down to, whatever they've done to them. They'll defend them. Oh my gosh, but the Bernie people, there's a lot of the Bernie people, in fact, maybe the majority of the Bernie people, who just will not just give in and say, fine, I'll vote for Hillary, for instance, or I will become a loyal card-carrying member of the Democratic Party. They've gotten involved. They had idealism. They thought they knew how it worked, and then they learned how it really worked. And so now they want nothing to do with it. Anyway, I got to end right now. And what I would encourage people to do is look up these articles about war and realize this is an issue you really need to get out there. Okay? This is an issue we can't afford to ignore. It's not just a issue. It's the issue. And we got to remember when we're electing everyone, to elect the ones that have a calm head, the ones that have that leadership style of Ronald Reagan or John F. Kennedy. Okay? We don't need people that are accusing everyone that disagrees with them of being Russian agents who, you get the point, is demonizing an entire segment of the population. That's scary. If a person is willing to do that and demonize Americans, just think what it's going to be like about the other countries. Ugh. Anyway, it's kind of ironic that I pre-recorded this yesterday, and then today I ran across an article. Well, it was actually sent to me, and it's an article in Politico. Okay, it's a very, very interesting article. It is titled, I was RFK, or Robert F. Kennedy's speechwriter. Now I'm voting for Trump. Here's why. Then it states, the Democratic Party has become something both JFK and RFK would deplore, the party of war. Now, the thing is that this fit in very well with the previous show, in that, I was talking about nuclear annihilation. The mythology that we could have a limited nuclear war and win. And ultimately, I was saying that if we continue with our current confrontational foreign policy, both the United States and NATO, of course NATO is the extension of the United States. It's like a glove on a fist. The thing is that if we continue with this, we very well could provoke a nuclear exchange. And hey, once you get that going, game over. You got the Walking Dead with radiation. In fact, you'd prefer to live in the world of the Walking Dead than to a world that had just undergone a nuclear war. Now, the thing is, Robert F. Kennedy's speechwriter here on Politico, please look the article up, okay? Politico, and look it up here. And there's a quote here I want to share. And he states, in fact, in all the years of the so-called War on Terror, only one potential American president has had the intelligence, the vision, the sheer sanity to see that America cannot fight the entire world at once. Who sees that America's natural and necessary allies in this fight must include the advanced and civilized nations that are most exposed and experienced in their own terror wars, and have the requisite military power and willingness to use it. Only one American candidate has pointed out how senseless it is to seek confrontation with Russia and China, at the same time that we are trying to suppress the very jihadist movements that they also are attacking. Now he goes on further. That candidate is Donald Trump. Throughout his campaign, he has said that as president, he would quickly sit down with President Putin and seek relaxation of tensions between our nations and possible collaboration in the fight against terrorists. On this ground alone, he marks himself as greatly superior to all his competitors, earlier in the primaries and now in the general election. Now, it's quite interesting that he's saying that during the War on Terror years, okay, we're talking, 2001, since 9/11, up till presently. If we think about those candidates he must be referring to, okay, now, of course, there's a variety of the minor, but let's just say the ones that made it into getting the nomination for president. So we had John Kerry. Well, we see how that, how peaceful policies he promotes. We had George Bush, who, regardless of whether he was being played like a puppet by members of his administration, doesn't matter. He was there, okay? He was the one who was the president and could have exercised more leadership in this regard. We have Obama, who everyone thought, hey, he's going to be Mr. Peace. And, the Europeans awarded him the Nobel Prize. Oh, wow. What an irony there. Awarding someone the Nobel Prize. And then there's not been one day since that day that the U.S. has not been engaged in war actions. Okay? Not one day. All right? You don't hear about it in the news because, every day you're going to report, okay, the U.S. bombed this country, this country, this country. It would get old, and come on, the average American wants to listen to what's going on with Angelina and Brad. Now, then you also have John McCain. Well, no explanation there, is there? And then Mitt Romney, who, again, I don't think we have to go into too much detail there either. It seems that Donald Trump is, as he's stating, the only guy who's at least willing to sit down and act like a negotiator, not one that's going to be throwing insults around. Okay? And the thing is that, we could go on with this article here. He states, and this is fair enough. It also must be said Mr. Trump is an imperfect candidate, and he would surely be an imperfect president. He is crude, often vulgar. He has areas of great ignorance. He insults people and inflicts unnecessary harm. He would be twice the candidate if he used half the words. I have to agree with that, actually. He is often intemperate, though it is not Trump but his opponent who is so intemperate as to compare Putin's moves in Ukraine to what Hitler did, an insult that throughout all the Cold War and to this day, no American president has ever offered to any Soviet or Russian leader. Not even, and it goes on to say, Joseph Stalin. Okay? It's not, this is, are we supposed to think that we're going to have better relations with Russia after making statements like that? I mean, if Hillary gets elected, you could see some very serious breakdown. And it's not been that, it's been 100 years since World War I was going on. And there's a lot of parallels taking place, okay? And what enabled, you gotta say, what enabled World War I to take place was the invention of artificial, being able to create artificial ingredients to make gunpowder. Before, you had to rely on natural ingredients, which were starting to run low and would not have been, what you would have to have for a massive war. But then, someone came up with some solutions, and voila, there was plenty to go around. But you see, that's pretty minor. Now you've got nuclear weapons. And if you detonate just a few of those suckers, you're talking about pretty much the end of civilization as we know it. And so, essentially, I believe, what this individual is saying here in the article is that we need to have someone willing to diffuse the situation, sit down, and at the very least ease the tension, and maybe even create allies in our shared quest. And I will say this, Russia and China and the United States have a lot of shared quest in this world. They should be cooperating and not, be having to build up weapons and so forth. Recently Putin gave a speech, was not in any of the mainstream media, in which he said, why aren't you people listening? We want to stop this whole arms race that's beginning. We don't want another Cold War. Can we please settle this? And you know what? The American government, no way we're going to continue. Okay? That's disastrous. You got Putin saying, hey, we need to solve this. And at the very least, come on, call his bluff. Sit down with him. At the very least, you could say a lot of bad things about George Bush, but at least he tried to be friends with Putin. Now, we got someone going into office that's trying to make it sound like that everyone who opposes her, the alternative right, and some sort of, what is it, some green frog or something like that, is it some way associated with some sort of Russian plot? Since when did we hear stuff like that? Since the 1950s, when people started getting blacklisted because they were suspected of being, Russian agents. Okay, I don't, this is scary. All right? I would really encourage people, go to Politico, read the article for yourself. Read the whole thing. It's really, really fascinating, very eloquently written. And it's listed by Adam Walensky, September 21st, 2016. I was RFK's speechwriter, now I'm voting for Trump. Here's why.
My name is S.M. Gibson, and I am the host of Anti